Hello, this is Yvonne Galusha, and in this video we are continuing to talk about ranges. Last time we did introduce the concept of an object, distinguishing between its properties and methods, properties being values, methods being actions, and we especially focused on selection or identifying ranges. This time we're going to focus on the properties of ranges. And so let's go ahead and get started. I am just going to cut and paste some code off and on in order to save time typing. The first property that I want to discuss is the address property. So that is going to be a value. All of these are properties or values. And you'll notice what I've done here is I've used, just as a little review, a range nested using another range, so range within a range to define this range. So we're saying starting at C2 right there and then going on down lower right to E10. That's what we're saying our range is. But address is going to display the absolute address for that range, and it's going to put it out in a message box. So let's go ahead and run that. And that worked. We see in absolute terms, remember the $ in Excel means absolute reference, starting at C2 to E10. So another property that you can use is cells. Now a cell is almost, you can think of it, cells property, like an array. If you are programmed in other languages, however, you have to kind of remember that the cell index does not start at 0, it starts at 1. So with this particular line of code, we're selecting a segment of a column, C2 to C10, so score 2, and we're saying we want cell item 3. So we're expecting selected to be right there, 62 residing in cell C4. Run this macro and you'll see that that worked. So keep in mind that cells is a property of range, and it's just allowing you to index into a specific location in the range. Now let's build on that. And what if you have not just a column, but a two-dimensional block, which is the case with this line of code. We've said all of the test scores, or not all of them, starting still at C2, I guess. So scores 2 through 4 ending down here at E10. That's the range, and now we're going to say cells, but because it's two-dimensional, now you need to have two values here as well. So you're going to go down 3 first, and then over 2. So starting here, 1, 2, 3, but over 2, this is going to be 1, the one you're sitting on. So it's 1, 2. So we're going to expect from when we run this macro that cell D4 is selected. I'm going to review this again because this sometimes is confusing when you use the cells property. You're finding a certain location within a range. You always start, the first value is down or up. If you have a negative value, you're going to move up. If you have a positive, you move down, and you count the location you're sitting on. So 1, 2, 3. The second value is going across. If it's negative, you move this direction, but it's positive, so we count the one we're sitting on, so it's 1, 2. Let's go ahead and run this. And that worked. Again, that's the cells property. Now, another property is just selecting the entire column or entire row. And this one is not very complicated. We start out designating a single cell range, in this case C2, and then we're saying select the entire column. And that's what happened. Another similar property is entire row. And if we run that, as you would expect, it's going to select the entire row too. And there it went. Okay, another one that we use when we're writing macros is what's called current region. Let me go ahead and get the code in place, and then I will discuss it. The current region is defined as the box once you have, or let me start again, the group of data, the range of data that is bound by a blank row and a blank column. So in this case, we're starting with a single C2 as the range, and so it's going to select all the way from A1 to E10, because this is the blank row and blank column. And you can see that worked. Even if you had a single blank cell in here, that is not going to change. It has to be an entire blank column and blank row that defines the current region. Now notice what I've done. I, in essence, am showing you how you can use these properties together. I've said, give me the address of the current region, and I'm going to display the result in a message box. So it's not going to do a select this time, it's simply going to display the address in a message box. And there we see the same cells, A1 to E10, in absolute terms for that basic address for the region. The next thing I want to talk about is the name property. So you may recall in Excel, you can type in and designate names. The reason we do that is then in our formulas, we would use the name. Well, that same concept applies to VBA code. So here you can see I'm assigning a value, test scores, and this is simply a string, that's why it's in quotes, to the property name for that range, B2 to E10, all the test scores. Then I'm using the name from there on, saying test scores.select. This technique can be very handy when you have very long range defined. For example, if you have ranges that consist of a single range, that is made up of parts of ranges of data from multiple workbooks, that ends up being a very long amount of code. So it's better to go ahead and give it a name, and then from then on just use the name. Now when I run this, I'll run it and then we'll show you. So it did the selection, but notice I also now can see that name defined. This helps you understand how VBA code affects when you're actually sitting and using Excel in the way that you are used to using it. The next property I want to talk about is the end property. This can be very helpful when you don't know how much data you have. For example, in this situation, we can see we have 9 students, but you may have a large amount of data and you don't know exactly how much, and so you want to use the end. Now in this property, you can't have a blank. It needs to be continuous. But what's going on here is you start in the upper left, B2, and you basically need to find the end of it. So you go to the very end in terms of you have 4 scores, so that's E2. And then you go end property Excel down. You may recall on some keyboards you can hold the End key and then push the down arrow, and that accomplishes the same thing manually with Excel. That's where this comes from. Laptop keyboards and other smaller devices, that doesn't work quite as well anymore. Instead, you would hold Control key, but that's where this property got its name, when you held the End key and then the down arrow. Now, again, we would hold the Control key and the down arrow. Let's go ahead and run this, and you'll see what happens. So we are selecting the entire range without having to say E10. Now, let's go ahead and do a slight modification. What if you don't know the amount across as well as the amount down? That's going to look very similar, a little different, but let's see what's happening here. And I'll unselect this too. We now are saying we want a range, and it's defined as a range starting at B2 and then continuing from B2, going down to the end and then to the right. So you can see by just using the End property twice, Excel down and then Excel to the right, then the selection, we can accomplish the data selection without knowing how many in either direction. And that works as well. Finally, I want to point out that, remember, you cannot have a blank. If there was a blank, this, say 85 wasn't there, it would not have gone down. It would have stopped at 74. Same thing if this had been a blank, it would not have moved across. So one thing that people will do to avoid that is they'll start outside of the range, like here, B1000. And then you'll still use the End property, but the direction is Excel up. So they know there's nothing until you hit the very end of the data set. And then in this particular situation, I'm just saying select that entire bottom row. So we'll run that, and you can better understand how to use some of the properties in ranges. Thank you.